Asia is crumbling. Yet here, in the humid valleys and forested hills, a different struggle is just beginning. A struggle that will grow into one of the most defining and devastating conflicts of the 20th century. But to understand the Vietnam War, you must first understand the earth in which its roots were planted. Colonialism, nationalism, revolution, and the age-old hunger for self-determination. For nearly a century, Vietnam had not truly belonged to the Vietnamese. It was France, arrogant, ambitious, and relentless, that had seized control of this land in the 19th century, folding it into the structure of French Indochina. They had called it a civilizing mission, bringing European customs, Catholicism, and administrative rule. But what they brought was exploitation. The French built railroads and rubber plantations, not for the people, but for profit. You, as a Vietnamese peasant or intellectual, found yourself a stranger in your own land, ruled by foreigners who took your rice, taxed your village, and ignored your culture. Resistance had always simmered beneath the surface, sporadic revolts, nationalist writings, secret societies, but none gained real traction. Until, in the early 20th century, an idea began to flicker among the discontented youth: Marxism. Among those youths was a man named Nguyen Tat Thanh, later known to the world as Ho Chi Minh. You follow his path as he travels across the globe, working on ships, living in Paris, learning in Moscow. By the 1930s, Ho becomes convinced. Communism is the path to liberation, and Vietnam must rise. He returns home in secrecy, helping to organize the Indochinese Communist Party. Then, the world plunges into World War II, and the colonial structure begins to wobble. The Japanese sweep into Indochina in 1940, humiliating the French and replacing them with their own brutal occupation. In the shadows, Ho Chi Minh and his followers established the Viet Minh, a nationalist communist resistance movement. They hide in the jungles, build base areas, and prepare for revolution. They are few, poorly armed, and hunted, but they believe the time is coming. That time arrives in 1945. As Japan surrenders to the Allies, a power vacuum opens. The French are humiliated, the Japanese defeated, and the Viet Minh emerge from the mountains. In September 1945, standing in Ba Dinh Square in Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh proclaims the birth of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Thousands cheer. He quotes the American Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal, but this new freedom is an illusion. In the South, the British and French move quickly to restore colonial authority. French troops land in Saigon, reasserting their power. Ho Chi Minh sends letters to President Harry Truman, begging for support. The United States, fresh from defeating fascism, turns a blind eye. America sees communism, not colonialism, as the great threat of the century. And so begins the first war of the Vietnamese century, the First Indochina War. You march with the Viet Minh through jungles and mountains, ambushing French patrols, laying traps, smuggling weapons. The war is brutal and slow. The French underestimate the determination of their former subjects. Villagers feed the revolutionaries, young men join their ranks, and women carry messages through dangerous terrain. By 1954, the French decide to make a stand at a place called Dien Bien Phu, a remote valley ringed by hills in northern Vietnam. They believe they can bait the Viet Minh into a decisive battle. They are wrong. You are among tens of thousands of Viet Minh fighters hauling artillery piece by piece up jungle-covered slopes. With pulleys, ropes, and human strength, you drag cannons into place. For weeks, you hammer the French positions. Rain turns the valley into a pit of death. Food runs out. Morale collapses. On May 7, 1954, the French garrison surrenders. It is a moment that shocks the world. A ragged revolutionary army defeating a European empire. From this defeat comes a conference, the Geneva Accords. World powers gather to solve the Vietnam problem. But instead of granting true independence, they carve the country in two. North Vietnam, under Ho Chi Minh, becomes a communist state. South Vietnam is handed to an anti-communist regime. led by Ngo Dinh Diem, a Catholic nationalist with little popular support but strong backing from the West. Vietnam is divided at the 17th parallel. Like Korea, an election is promised to reunify the country, but the South, with American approval, refuses. They know Ho Chi Minh would win. And so, instead of peace, a new war begins, quietly, in whispers and shadows. You remain in the North, now a fledgling state with Soviet and Chinese support. The dream of reunification remains, but the road is unclear. In the South, Diem cracks down on all opposition, communists, Buddhists, and liberals alike. His government grows more corrupt, more isolated, more violent. Resistance grows. Underground cadres begin to form in the villages and countryside. They are called the Viet Cong, a derogatory term at first, but one that will soon become infamous. And once again, you are in the jungle. You dig tunnels, build networks, and plant the seeds of war. But this time, it will not be France you face. This time, the war will draw in the greatest power on Earth. This time, it will be America. You hear the rotors before you see the machines. The thudding beat of helicopters echoes over the treetops like the distant pounding of war drums. They slice the humid air, their downdraft sending leaves spiraling into the sky. Below, green-clad, men descend like ghosts from the clouds, young, clean-shaven, freshly trained, and far from home. It is 1961. The Americans have arrived in Vietnam. They do not come all at once, not in the beginning. You watch them land in small numbers, advisors, trainers, military liaisons. They speak of stability, of freedom, of containing communism. Washington has decided that South Vietnam must not fall. The Cold War is in full swing, and in American minds, Vietnam is not simply a country. It is a domino. If it topples, so too might Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, even Indonesia. But the men who land here understand little of your forests, your rivers, your history, your pain. To them, Vietnam is a pawn on a chessboard. They wear sunglasses, chew gum, and speak of victory. You, watching from the tree line, know this will not be easy for them. You have seen empires bleed on this soil. Ngo Dinh Diem, the man they support, tightens his grip on the South. His regime, propped up by American money and guns, is deeply unpopular. Buddhist monks begin to protest. Some set themselves ablaze in the streets of Saigon, flames licking the sky as cameras roll. Diem calls them traitors. The world calls him a tyrant. In 1963, with quiet approval from the United States, South Vietnamese generals overthrow Diem. He is executed in the back of an armored vehicle, his blood staining the interior red. There is no sorrow in the countryside, but chaos follows. South Vietnam descends into instability, cycling through leader after leader, each one weaker than the last. The Viet Cong grow stronger. You walk by night with them now, moving silently, through the Mekong Delta, through the highlands of the central region, through villages where peasants whisper their allegiance. Your comrades carry rifles and shovels. They fight by day and dig by night, building an invisible network beneath the very soil the enemy stands upon. In Washington, the new president, Lyndon B. Johnson, feels the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. He fears that to withdraw would be seen as weakness. America must not lose a war to communists. Not after Korea, not after Cuba. The specter of the Soviet Union looms large, so he escalates. Then, in August 1964, a spark, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Two American destroyers, the Maddox and Turner, Joy, report attacks by North Vietnamese patrol boats. Whether these attacks actually occurred remains murky, but the result is clear. The U.S. Congress passes the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, giving Johnson nearly unlimited power to wage war. You feel the shift almost immediately. The forests shudder with the roar of bombers. Napalm falls from the sky, a sticky inferno that clings to skin and trees alike. Villages burn. Helicopters prowl like metal hawks. And the boots come, hundreds of thousands of boots. By 1966, over 400,000 American troops are in Vietnam. By 1968, that number will reach 500,000. They arrive in force, with M16s, with flamethrowers, with tanks, with Agent Orange. They build bases the size of cities, complete with air conditioning, Coca-Cola, and PX stores. You marvel at the scale of it, yet you know it is all vulnerable. For every soldier they bring, you have a shadow in the jungle. For every helicopter, you have a tunnel. The Americans call it a counterinsurgency, but you fight it as a people's war. Your weapons are simple. Booby traps made from bamboo, mines forged from scrap metal, rifles decades old. But your knowledge of the terrain is unmatched. You strike from the shadows and disappear. The enemy grows paranoid. Every villager is a suspect, every child a potential spy. You see their frustration grow. They try to win hearts and minds, handing out candy and medicine. But the villagers remain quiet, cautious, afraid. At night you return, asking for rice, for shelter, for sons to join the fight. Most give it, some don't. The price for disobedience is heavy on both sides. Then comes Operation Rolling Thunder, a massive bombing campaign aimed at the north. From 1965 to 1968, American planes dropped more bombs on Vietnam than were used in all of World War II. Hanoi shudders, Haiphong burns, bridges, roads, factories, all targeted. But the people do not break, you do not break. In the north, entire villages move underground. Schools, hospitals, even theaters are built beneath the earth. In the south, American patrols move through the countryside, trying to separate you from the people. But the more they push, the more the people resent them. Then, in March 1968, the unthinkable happens. My Lai. You hear the stories in whispers. An American unit enters a village suspected of harboring Viet Cong. They find no weapons, no fighters, only women, children, the elderly. But rage and fear boil over. The soldiers open fire. Over 500 civilians are massacred, bayoneted, shot, burned alive. Photographs leak to the press. The world recoils. Back in the United States, the war begins to fracture the nation. Television brings the horror home. Each night, Americans watch burning villages, crying children, body bags. The public grows uneasy. Students protest. Draft cards burn. The once mighty support for the war begins to crumble. But you are not watching television. You are in the jungle, preparing for your boldest move yet. You had waited for the right moment. You had whispered, planned, trained, and waited. For years, the Americans had grown confident in their numbers and their firepower. They believed that their superior technology and weaponry would eventually grind you down. But you knew their weakness. You saw it in their eyes when they left their bases at dawn and didn't know if they'd return by dusk. You felt it in their hurried steps through the rice paddies, in their startled trigger fingers, in their fear of the very shadows you moved in. And so, you planned a storm. It is January 1968. In cities across the South, you are already there. Disguised as civilians, you are vendors, drivers, laborers. At night, you gather with others like you in hidden rooms, basements, and jungle clearings. The order has come from Hanoi. This will not be a strike from the shadows. This will be thunder. You know the risks. You know it is not a battle to win territory. It is a battle for belief. A statement that the war is far from over. That the enemy is not safe, even in their own strongholds. You hope to awaken the people of the South, to inspire them to rise. You hope to show the Americans they are not the masters of this land. The date is chosen with precision. January 30th, the Lunar New Year. Tet, traditionally, this is a time of truce, of celebration, of family. Even the war is supposed to pause. The Americans relax. South Vietnamese troops go on leave. The streets of Saigon are quieter than usual. Fireworks crackle in the distance. The scent of incense and sticky rice fills the air. And then it begins. At exactly midnight, you strike. In over 100 towns and cities, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces explode into action. Huy, Da Nang, Ban Mi Thuat, Can Tho, Kontum, and Saigon itself all become battlefields overnight. Police stations are attacked. Government buildings are overrun. Even the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, a symbol of American dominance, is assaulted. You and your comrades breach the walls, shoot through the halls. For hours, the embassy, that fortress of American pride, becomes a war zone. You do not hold it, but the damage is done. Television cameras capture the chaos. Blood stains the marble. Smoke curls above the rooftop. And across the world, millions ask, if the Americans are winning, how is this possible? In the ancient imperial city of Hu, the battle is different. You take it swiftly, but you hold it longer. Street by street, alley by alley, the city becomes a maze of fire and steel. American Marines and South Vietnamese troops respond with fury. The bombardment is relentless. Entire neighborhoods vanish under artillery and airstrikes. But what shocks the world most is what you do while the city is yours. You round up officials, policemen, teachers, anyone linked to the South Vietnamese. Government? Some are executed, others vanish. When the Americans retake Hue after nearly a month, they discover mass graves. The world sees the brutality not just of war, but of ideology. Your cause is righteous to you, but it is not gentle. The cost is staggering. You lose tens of thousands. Your infrastructure in the South is shattered. Thousands of your operatives are dead or captured. On the surface, it appears a failure. But you know better. Because in America, the foundation cracks. The images of the Tet Offensive reach television sets and newspapers within hours. And what they show is not a secure South, not a war being won. They show carnage, ambushed soldiers, blown-out buildings, dead Americans. It is the psychological impact that strikes hardest. President Lyndon Johnson watches these images in silence. In private, he rages. His advisors cannot explain how, with over 500,000 American troops in Vietnam, the enemy could launch such a widespread attack. Public trust begins to wither. General Westmoreland demands more troops. But Johnson senses the tide is turning in late March 1968. Johnson makes a shocking announcement. He will not seek re-election. A sitting president, broken by a war he cannot win. Meanwhile, anti-war protests swell in the streets of America. Students march with signs. Mothers cry in front of the White House. Martin Luther King Jr. speaks out against the war. Muhammad Ali refuses to be drafted. The nation splits, not by geography, but by conscience. And while the Americans argue, you regroup. In the jungles and in the north, you assess the cost. Tet has burned your fighters. But it has done what you hoped. It shattered illusions. It made the Americans question. And when your enemy begins to doubt, you know the path to victory is not as distant as it once seemed. But the war is far from over. Ahead lies a trail of blood, betrayal, and a village whose name will echo in shame. My Lai. The jungle breathes heavy around you now. Not with the quiet confidence of earlier campaigns, but with something colder. There is suspicion in every glance, fear in every heartbeat. After Tet, the war has shifted, not just on the battlefield, but in the soul. Something dark grows in the ranks of the American forces. You can feel it, the way patrols move faster, guns raised higher, voices louder, more erratic. And it is in this atmosphere of pressure, panic, and paranoia that something unspeakable happens. It is March 16th, 1968. You watch from afar, hidden in the tree line, as the helicopters land outside a quiet hamlet in Quang Ngai province. This is My Lai, Sun Mai to the locals. A patchwork of thatched roofs, rice paddies, and morning routines. Chickens cluck. Children smile through half-curious eyes. Women bend over cook fires. To them, the war is a distant noise, a shadow on the edge of their world. But today, the shadow steps into the sun. From the helicopters spill American soldiers, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry. They come expecting combat, expecting to flush out Viet Cong insurgents allegedly hiding among the villagers. They believe they are entering a nest of enemies. They have been told their comrades were lost in mines and ambushes set by this very community. Their anger festers beneath their helmets. fueled by fear and grief and the stress of an invisible enemy. No one fires on them, no shots are exchanged, no enemy appears. Yet the killing begins. You see it, and even from a distance it stuns you. You've seen death before. You've buried comrades. You've laid mines that exploded into American patrols. But this is different. This is slaughter. The soldiers herd unarmed villagers into ditches. Old men, pregnant women, small children. Some plead, some run, some are silent. None are spared. Rifles crack in short bursts and long volleys. The dirt darkens with blood. The sky seems to shrink. You see a soldier, young, trembling, lower his weapon, refusing to shoot. Another shouts at him. Somewhere in the chaos, you hear a cry rise and vanish. An American helicopter swoops low, and from it a door gunner watches in disbelief. That man, Warrant Officer Hugh Thompson, sees what's happening and lands nearby. With two other crewmen, he confronts his fellow soldiers. He places himself between the villagers and the rifles. He threatens to open fire on his own side if they don't stop. His bravery saves a few lives. Only a few. When it is over 500 civilians lie dead. Shot, beaten, bayoneted, burned. The official reports call it a success, a body count, a victory. But the truth cannot stay buried. For months, the massacre is hidden. You go about your war haunted. In whispers, stories of what happened at My Lai spread among your people, among the southern villagers. It becomes more than a tragedy. It becomes a symbol, a wound so deep it cannot heal. And then, in late 1969, it breaks open. An American soldier, Ron Ridenour, writes letters to Congress, to military leaders, to anyone who will listen. He had heard the rumors. He demands the truth. Slowly, like a rotten log cracking under pressure, the lie begins to split. Seymour Hersh, a journalist, investigates. He publishes a report. The American public reels. Pictures emerge. Bodies in ditches, women with torn clothing, children twisted in death. One image, a little girl lying face down in the grass, becomes unforgettable. Lieutenant William Calley, the officer who led the massacre, is charged. The trial captures the world's attention. You watch from a distance, not with satisfaction, but a strange ache. The enemy is punishing one of its own, but to you the punishment seems hollow. Calley is convicted but serves only 3.5 years under house arrest. For over 500 lives, that is the price. The impact, however, is vast. In America, outrage explodes. The anti-war movement ignites with new fury. Protesters shout, "Remember My Lai," in marches from New York to San Francisco. Veterans burn their medals. Students occupy university halls. Even soldiers in the field begin to question their orders. In Vietnam, you feel something shift. More peasants turn toward your cause, not because they agree with your ideology, but because they no longer trust the Americans. My Lai has shown them what that trust brings. But this war, this cruel, consuming war, still grinds on. You return to the jungles, to the trails, to the whispered planning. America, now deeply fractured, begins seeking a way out. Peace talks open in Paris. Nixon rises to power on promises of peace with honor, while secretly expanding the bombing into Cambodia and Laos. The war spreads like a fire finding dry grass. But it is My Lai that continues to smolder in the conscience of a nation. It is a scar that cannot be rewritten. And for you, it is proof that even the most powerful armies can lose their way. You move now toward new battles, new betrayals, and a trail that leads not only through jungles but across borders. Ahead lies Cambodia. You don't see the border anymore. Not really. The jungles between Vietnam and Cambodia blur into one unbroken green. But on the maps in Washington and Saigon, those invisible lines matter. Cambodia is supposed to be neutral, a quiet neighbor, a sovereign nation untouched by this firestorm. But you know the truth, and so do the Americans. The Ho Chi Minh Trail snakes through Laos and Cambodia like a shadow. Through hidden valleys and dense forests, it carries men and weapons southward. You move under the cover of night, your sandals, padding softly on dirt paths worn by years of war. The trail is your artery. Without it, your southern comrades starve for ammunition, for food, for reinforcements. The Americans know this, and though they speak of peace, they prepare for more war. It is 1969. Richard Nixon is now president. He promises to end the war, to bring American boys home. But in secret, he unleashes something darker. In March, he approves Operation Menu, a series of covert bombing campaigns against Cambodian territory. The names are surreal: breakfast, lunch, dinner, dessert. Innocent words for the deafening roar of B-52 bombers dropping hundreds of tons of explosives. You hear them before. You see them. The rumble, the tremble of earth, the sudden geysers of flame erupting from the forest floor. Villages vanish in seconds. The jungle burns. Craters open like mouths of the dead. And all the while, Washington denies it. You adapt. You dig deeper. Tunnels. You scatter your forces. You use children as lookouts, mothers as messengers. The bombing is relentless, but you survive. You bend like bamboo, but Cambodia does not. Its fragile monarchy wobbles. Prince Norodom Sihanouk tries to walk a tightrope, appeasing both sides, balancing diplomacy and survival. But in 1970, that balance shatters. With American backing, General Lon Nol seizes power in a coup. Cambodia is now officially in the war, and you too step across the line. You march alongside Khmer Rouge fighters, strange, rigid comrades with their own grim ideology. Together, you battle Lon Nol's army. Cambodian towns erupt in chaos. The countryside drowns in confusion, fear, and blood. Civilians flee in all directions. Once neutral villages become graveyards. Meanwhile, in America, news of the secret bombings and the Cambodian invasion detonates like a political bomb. On campuses across the United States, students rise in fury. Protesters chant, flags burn. At Kent State University, the National Guard opens fire on unarmed students. 4 lie dead. Photographs of the massacre are splashed across the world. America is eating itself. Nixon calls the protesters bums, but even his allies are uneasy. Congress demands answers. The Pentagon leaks, the press investigates. The truth can no longer hide in the shadows. But for you in the steaming jungle, these headlines are distant thunder. You know only that Cambodia bleeds, that the war, once Vietnam's alone, has metastasized. The Americans speak of peace, but their bombs say otherwise. Still, you feel the cracks widening, inside the United States, inside South Vietnam, and even inside Cambodia. You push forward. In Phnom Penh, the Lon Nol regime clings to power. In the countryside, the Khmer Rouge grows, stronger, darker. In Saigon, American advisors grow weary, and in Hanoi, your leaders see opportunity. Every protest in Washington is a drumbeat toward your victory. But what grows in Cambodia will one day horrify even you. For in the chaos you helped create, the Khmer Rouge will rise to power, not just as allies, but as monsters. But that is for later. For now, you march through mud and ash. The trail runs crimson, the jungle devours all. And ahead, the Americans begin their final act, Vietnamization. You stand in the jungle, watching the helicopters rise once more into the sky. But something is different. The American soldiers on board do not look like they are preparing for combat. They look like they are leaving. It is 1970 and the war is changing again. From the mouths of generals and presidents comes a new word, Vietnamization. A strange term for an old idea, passing the burden. The plan is clear. The United States will begin pulling out its troops, but the war must go on. And so they hand the rifle to someone else, to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, to the ARVN, to your brothers in the South who wear the same uniform as your enemy. You watch them train, you watch them march, but you do not fear them, because Vietnamization is not just a policy, it is a desperate gamble. The Americans know the clock is ticking, Anti-war protests rock their cities. Congress tightens the purse strings. The My Lai massacre, the Pentagon Papers, Cambodia, the scandals pile up like corpses in the jungle. Nixon wants out, but he wants to save face, to leave without surrendering. And so he speaks of peace with honor, but you see no peace and no honor. What you see are young, frightened South Vietnamese recruits thrust into command posts. What you see are units armed with American weapons but lacking American coordination, air power, or morale. What you see is an army not born of unity, but of dependency. And dependency is a weak spine in war. Still, the Americans do not disappear overnight. They bomb, they advise, they fund. The skies above you roar with the last rage of a dying empire. Operation Linebacker, Linebacker 2, the Christmas bombings. They flatten Hanoi, Haiphong, bridges, factories, hospitals. You huddle in shelters as steel rain falls from the heavens. Children tremble, mothers sing lullabies beneath the thunder, and yet you endure. You who have no bombers, no napalm, no fleets. You who carry rice in hollowed bamboo. You who cross rivers on sandals made from tires. You are still standing. The war becomes a battle of wills now, and yours, hardened by years. Of struggle, by the deaths of friends, by the smoke in your lungs and the fire in your chest, is unbreakable. In the South, Saigon becomes a fortress. The U.S. builds its final shield, an army of allies wrapped in khaki, supported by jets and tanks and hollow promises. President Thieu rules with an iron hand, silencing dissent, consolidating power. But you know that the real strength of a nation is not in its guns, but in its belief. And Thieu's government, like a paper tiger, burns easily when struck. Meanwhile, in America, the divisions deepen. The Watergate scandal erupts. Nixon falls. The new president, Gerald Ford, inherits a country exhausted by war, scandal, inflation, and despair. There is no appetite left for foreign bloodshed. You can feel it. The retreat is no longer just physical, it is spiritual. And so, you press on. Not as conquerors, but as survivors. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords are signed. You remember the words. You remember the flashbulbs. You remember the promises. All U.S. troops will leave Vietnam. All prisoners of war will be returned. The fighting will cease. But you also remember history. You know that treaties are fragile things. You do not disarm. You do not rest. You dig in knowing that the South will not collapse from signatures alone. It must fall from within. In Saigon, panic simmers. Without American troops, the ARVN scrambles to hold territory. Supplies dwindle, morale fractures, desertion increases. You hear stories of entire units abandoning their posts, of commanders fleeing before battle begins, and you know the time is coming. Vietnamization has handed over the rifle, but it cannot hand over conviction. And so, you prepare for one final push. You move through mountains and forests. You plan your offensives. You gather allies. The North is united. The South is brittle. The Americans are gone, and ahead lies Saigon. You don't need orders. You don't need speeches. You only need to look south and see the cracks widening. It is now 1975. You march not with celebration, but with silence. The jungle behind you is quieter now. The skies once filled with the thunder of American B-52s are mostly still. What remains is the scent of ash, the whispers of graves, and the long breath before collapse. Your commanders no longer speak of resistance. They speak of conclusion. The Southern government, the Republic of Vietnam, is collapsing from within. Not with a bang, but with a long, trembling shiver. You advance through the Central Highlands, and there is barely a fight. ARVN forces retreat. Chaos. Towns like Ban Mi Thuot fall like leaves. Refugees clog the roads. Helicopters hover over panicked civilians, lifting a few while leaving the many. You do not rejoice. You've seen this before. In Hue, in Quang Tri, in Laos, in Cambodia. Each time the enemy retreats, what's left behind is hunger, confusion, and graves. By March, you reach Hue and Da Nang, Cities once filled with American Marines and promises of freedom. Now they are filled with broken tanks, terrified civilians, and the echo of evacuations. The roads are clogged with the defeated, soldiers dressed as peasants, mothers cradling babies, children too tired to cry. Da Nang Airport becomes a war of its own. South Vietnamese soldiers fight each other for seats on the last planes. Some cling to the landing gear. Some are crushed beneath it. You do not stop. You cannot stop. Not now. The great cities fall faster than you ever dreamed. 1 month. 2. No great battle, just great unraveling. Like a flag torn by too many hands, too many lies. In April, you are at the gates of Saigon, and still, they do not surrender. Inside the capital, panic spreads like wildfire. The U.S. Embassy becomes a fortress of desperation. Thousands of South Vietnamese crowd its gates begging for evacuation. Some climb the walls. Some toss babies over fences into the arms of strangers. The air is filled with the roar of helicopter blades, endless and urgent. Operation Frequent Wind begins. From rooftops and gardens, from hotel courtyards and schoolyards, helicopters lift off one after another. CH-46, Hueys, every bird still. Flying. They carry American civilians, diplomats, soldiers. They carry selected South Vietnamese allies. They carry secrets and shame. The streets of Saigon fill with chaos. Looting, screaming, soldiers abandoning their posts. Government officials burn documents in their offices while others flee in disguise. But you do not rush. You move with purpose. You are inside the city limits now, and the city that once stood as the capital of a separate Vietnam, the proud bastion of the Republic, is now a hollow stage. On April 30th, 1975, the last U.S. helicopter lifts off from the embassy rooftop. You do not watch it rise. Instead, your boots step into the city center. The tanks roll in from the west. One crashes through the gates of the presidential palace. The South Vietnamese president, Duong Van Minh, recently installed in a desperate last-minute bid for negotiation, sits quietly in a white uniform. He tells your commanders, "I await the handover of power." They reply, "You have nothing to hand over. Your government no longer exists. There are no parades, no shouting, no great speeches, just the silence of a war that has finally ended. For you, the moment is not triumph. It is release. 20 years, 3 million lives, a nation divided, a world watching. And now, at last, the war is over. The city is yours. The country is whole again. But victory has its own burden. You walk the streets of Saigon, soon to be renamed Ho Chi Minh City, and you see not celebration but aftermath. Families torn apart, buildings scarred by bullets and fire, minds frayed by years of terror, children who have never known peace. You are victorious, but what you see is the price of survival. In the homes of the defeated, fear still lingers. Some believe retribution will come. Some prepare for it. Others simply kneel and pray that the war has truly ended. You do not carry vengeance. You carry exhaustion. Yet even as the final shots are fired, another war is brewing. Not with bombs, not with bullets, but with memories, with blame, with the rewriting of history. In the United States, images of the last helicopter lifting from the embassy rooftop become the defining symbol of defeat. The word Vietnam will haunt their leaders for decades. No president, no general will speak of it without hesitation. You are a peasant's son, a soldier, a survivor. But history will now call you a symbol. To some, you are a hero. To others, a threat, but you know what you truly are, a witness. A vessel for all those who fell and all those who rose. A nameless face in the crowd that carried a nation toward its uncertain future. Because even as the last American leaves and the flag of the South is lowered, you understand one truth. This war may be over, but its fire still burns. That fire will flicker in books and songs and scars, passed down through generations. And as you walk through the streets of the city that was once your enemy's capital, you realize you have stepped into a city that is no longer just Saigon, but a symbol of the war's bitter end and a fragile new beginning. The red flag with the golden star rises where the yellow and red stripes once waved. The war may have ended in April 1975, but for you and the millions who survived, a new struggle begins, one of rebuilding, of reckoning, and of reunification. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam declares the country unified under communist rule. The South is absorbed into the North's vision for a new Vietnam, a single socialist nation, but the scars of war run deep. Cities lie in ruins, farms are abandoned, and countless families are broken, scattered by years of fighting, displacement, and death. You walk the streets, observing the ghosts of war in every corner, the wreckage of tanks, the shattered windows, the silent factories that once hummed with life now lie empty. Millions of refugees flood into the cities, displaced from their homes in the countryside, seeking safety and stability in a land that is still uncertain. The new government sets out to rebuild the nation, but the challenges are enormous. The economy is devastated, infrastructure destroyed, food is scarce. The United States has imposed an economic embargo, hoping to pressure the new regime, but it only deepens the hardships of ordinary people. You witness the land reforms in the South, where the government attempts to redistribute land from the former landlords and elites to peasants and farmers. But the process is chaotic, marked by mistrust, accusations, and sometimes violence. Old divisions do not heal overnight. Many former South Vietnamese soldiers and officials are sent to re-education camps, places of harsh labor and indoctrination. You hear stories of families torn apart by imprisonment and exile. Some resist quietly, others openly. The government's grip tightens, determined to root out dissent and unify the country under a single ideology. Meanwhile, millions of Vietnamese who had supported the South flee the country in desperate boats, seeking asylum across the oceans. The boat people risk death by sea, pirates, storms, and starvation for a chance at freedom. Their journey becomes another tragic chapter in the long aftermath of war. Outside Vietnam's borders, the war has left deep wounds as well. The United States is mired in political and cultural trauma. Veterans return home to a nation divided, sometimes despised for their service. The government reevaluates its foreign policies, wary of entanglements in distant lands. In Vietnam, however, the war's devastation is immediate and total. The countryside is littered with unexploded bombs and landmines, killing and maiming for decades to come. Agent Orange, the chemical defoliant sprayed by the U.S. military, leaves behind a legacy of birth defects and environmental ruin. But amid the ruin, there is resilience. You see villages rebuilding their homes, farmers tilling the land, children returning to school. The Vietnamese people, North and South, begin the long, painful process of healing and reconciliation. The war may have torn the country apart, but it also forged a new unity, born from shared suffering and hope for the future. You listen to the stories of the veterans who fought on both sides, men who once faced each other across muddy rice paddies, now seeking peace in a shattered nation. Some find forgiveness, others carry grudges. History, as ever, is written by both the victors and the victims. The world watches cautiously. Vietnam remains isolated, a symbol of Cold War tensions and ideological struggle. Yet beneath the surface, the country begins to breathe again. You realize that the war's end is only the beginning of a new chapter, one that will test the strength and spirit of the Vietnamese people for generations. And as you walk through the streets once more, you know. The guns have fallen silent, the helicopters have ceased their roar, and the battlefield has turned quiet. Yet the echoes of the Vietnam War continue to reverberate, not just across the mountains and rivers of Vietnam, but across the world in hearts and minds, in history books, and in the living memories of millions. You stand at the edge of a new era, where the war's legacy is not just measured in the thousands of lives lost or the cities torn apart, but in the lessons learned, the wounds carried, and the changes sparked. Vietnam today is no longer a distant battlefield, but a nation rebuilding and reconnecting with the global community. The war that once isolated it has transformed it. The economic reforms of the Choi Moi in the late 1980s opened the country to the world, shifting from rigid socialism to a mixed economy that embraces trade, tourism, and investment. You see bustling streets filled with scooters, neon signs, and a vibrant youth eager to move beyond the shadows of the past. But the past is never far behind. Generations born after the war grow up hearing stories from their parents and grandparents, learning about the sacrifices and the suffering, the hopes and the heartbreaks. The war is taught in schools, memorialized in museums, and debated in homes. It is a reminder that peace is fragile, that conflict comes at a terrible cost, and that unity requires understanding. For many in the United States, the Vietnam War remains a source of reflection and reckoning. It was the first televised war, bringing graphic images and stories into living rooms across the country, shaking public trust in government and sparking widespread protest movements. The war altered American politics, culture, and foreign policy for decades. You think about the veterans on both sides, those who returned home to gratitude, to scorn, or to silence. Many carry invisible wounds, PTSD, broken families, and lost futures. Their stories remind us of the human cost behind every statistic and headline. Around the world, the Vietnam War shaped Cold War dynamics and influenced the paths of other conflicts. In Asia, Africa, and Latin America, it underscored the limits of military power in achieving political goals and the complexities of nationalism and ideology. You ponder the notion of intervention, the promises made, the alliances forged, the mistakes committed. The war teaches the peril of underestimating local realities, the importance of empathy, and the cost of prolonged conflict. Yet amid the lessons, there are stories of hope. You see the bridges built between former enemies. You witness cultural exchanges, economic partnerships, and diplomatic reconciliations. Vietnam and the United States normalized relations in the 1990s, paving the way for cooperation and mutual respect. In Vietnam, the war's memory is preserved with care, through monuments, museums, and ceremonies honoring the fallen. But the nation also looks forward, balancing remembrance with progress. As you reflect on the war's complex legacy, you realize that history is not a single story but many intertwined narratives. Each perspective adds depth to our understanding. Each voice enriches the truth. The war changed the world, but it also changed the people who lived through it, shaping identities, influencing policies, and inspiring generations to seek peace. And now, as you stand at this crossroads of memory and future, you prepare to step into the final chapter. Because the story of the Vietnam War is not over, it lives on. The story of the Vietnam War comes full circle here, but its flames still flicker in the hearts of those who lived it, and in the pages of history that continue to be written. As you look back, you realize that this conflict was more than a war of guns and bombs. It was a war of ideas, identity, resilience, and the unyielding spirit of a people determined to define their own destiny. You remember the fields scorched by napalm, the jungles echoing with gunfire, the endless marches, and the silent nights filled with waiting and fear. You remember the faces, soldiers, civilians, children, caught in the crossfire of a global struggle that stretched far beyond their borders. Yet amidst all this, you also see hope. You see a nation that rose from ashes, that rebuilt itself with determination and courage. A nation that embraced change without forgetting its roots. Vietnam today stands as a testament to endurance, to reconciliation, and to the human capacity for renewal. The wounds of war are still visible, scarred landscapes, lives forever altered, families still mourning. But so are the signs of peace. Bustling cities, thriving markets, laughter of children in schoolyards, and voices speaking of a future untethered from conflict. You think about the generations born after the war, those who did not live through the battlefields, but carry its legacy in their blood. For them, the war is a history lesson, a cautionary tale, and a source of national pride and sorrow. Globally, the Vietnam War serves as a profound lesson about the consequences of foreign intervention, the complexities of ideological conflict, and the resilience of people caught in the middle. It challenges us to think critically about power, justice, and humanity. As you close this chapter, you feel the weight of remembrance. Remembering the sacrifices made, the lives lost, and the dreams deferred is essential, not just to honor the past, but to guide the future. Building the future means learning from the past. It means fostering dialogue over division, compassion over conflict, and unity over fragmentation. It means recognizing the shared humanity that binds us all, beyond borders and beliefs. You walk away with a renewed commitment to peace, to understanding, and to the relentless pursuit of a world where such wars become relics of a darker time. The Vietnam War was a flame that once burned fiercely, rousing the world's attention and changing its course. Today, it remains a beacon, a reminder of the costs of war and the enduring hope for peace. Your journey through the war's history may end here, but its lessons live on. And so does the story of Vietnam, the story of survival, reconciliation, and an unwavering flame lighting the path forward.